they should've just sent the whiskey when they saw the trouble coming. Oh, they should've just sent the whiskey, then there wouldn't be a running. The times are tough and things are bad, so why be dumb and risky? When you see the trouble come, you better just send the whiskey.
Now I know what Project Horizons is. If you recall my old review of the Fallout Equestria Project Horizons, you know, the first 33 chapters or so review. Now, I had designed this funny little logo for the review, which showcased Blackjack drowning in a sea of blood while dealing the cards of destiny with me dressed as the dealer on this little boat that had the words SS "Try Too Hard" written on them. It was meant as a metaphor to basically make fun of the fact, exaggerate and make fun of the fact that this story was trying way too hard to be the grittier, super ultra violent and more rape friendly and in general nastier version of Fallout Equestria. As if Fallout Equestria wasn't enough, you know, gritty and tragic and bloody as it was. So it was meant as a joke, as a metaphor. So imagine my surprise when a few chapters more down the line in the story, Blackjack actually finds herself swimming in a literal pool of blood. At the cost of repeating myself, but really I don't have any other choice in that merit, I had to reprise my old points. This story's trying way too hard. In every single aspect. And in the long run, this led to disastrous and quite frankly unhappy decisions. Not just in the characterization of Blackjack and her growth as a character, which became redundant, so to speak. It seems that most of the tragedies, most of the things Blackjack ran through, had the purpose of exactly repeating what her conflicts were already, whatever conflicts she already had going on. She fails to save someone, she broods about it, she angsts about it. She managed to save someone, but she didn't do it quite right as she wanted to do, so more angst, more brooding, and then she gets mangled, she gets raped, she gets tortured, she tried to kill herself, she becomes a death machine, she tries to distance herself from what she was becoming, and then in doing so she became exactly what she didn't want to become. She would angst, and she would angst about angsting, and she would become emo, and then she would joke about it, and try to burden everything herself, failing to do so, and then having all this repeat again, over and over and over again. It was eat, sleep, have sex, brood, repeat. Eat, sex, brood, repeat. Eat, sex, brood, repeat. Eat, sex, brood, repeat. I think you're getting the point by now. This story ran the very feasible risk of becoming redundant, of the struggle that Blackjack was facing in her whatever path she was going to have. In the longest run, they were hampering the credibility of her character and their story as a whole. Because of this redundancy, because of her basically going through the same motions and the same conflicts over and over again, even when she actually showed us some hints of getting better, of actually growing and becoming a better character. But then something would happen and I would throw her back right at the beginning. I'm hampering here, but for the most part, I enjoy what the writer did with Blackjack, because Blackjack is at this exact point in time in the story pretty much the only redeeming factor of the story itself. I mean, it is a blessing that she is the epicenter of the story, that everything about it completely and utterly revolves around her and whatever she does. Seriously, it's kind of ridiculous, but we'll get to that. It is fortunate that Blackjack, despite all the torture and all the self-loathing, did somehow, by some miracle, manage to become one of the most charismatic, endearing, and just entertaining to follow main characters in a story I've come across so far. It's really quite ingenious. Our character still manages to be interesting to see after, going through the same conflicts and the same sorrows multiple times. The fact about Blackjack is that her development as a character tends to be subtle. Well, the only subtle thing about this story as a whole, this novel. Well, and not always, because actually, subtlety is not the strongest suit of Project Horizons. Let me explain. You had Blackjack, at some point Blackjack seems to becoming more cyber pony than pony, so to speak, and that gives her a chance to actually to add to the already bag of sorrow the notion that she might not be an equine anymore, and human condition or pony condition, read between the line, etc., etc. It's not exactly subtle about that, and it gets worse because more parts are added, more injuries are sustained, and because she never ever stops. She's addicted to her own determination to do better, which in turns only get her to suffer the most. And ironically, the more she does that, the more she blinds herself to the actual good deeds that she accomplishes. Because she always sees the worst of it. She tends to see the worst of it every time. She doesn't quite bring herself to realize the good that she does amidst all the bad, all the necessary evil, so to speak, that she comes across. And at this point in the story, it becomes more obvious the good she's done so far, which is a good thing. But how do I put it? It took too long. It took too long to get to this point. It took two wrong turns to repetition, to redundancy, to quite frankly, physical upgrades. I heard about ever-changing protagonists, but this is ridiculous. She became more machine than pony, and then suddenly, I'm almost tempted to call it a Deus Ex Machina, she's now a pony of flesh and bones. Well, again, because of conveniency. And I'm going to complain a lot about that certain chapter along the way, but first, let me tell you what this story does right. Okay. Somewhere along the next self-bashing, self-loathing display of destructiveness and attempted suicide and all that, the author seemed to have finally decided to do something to change this status quo in a radical fashion. He decided it was time for Blackjack to actually start realistically start to stop hating yourself. Thus, we come across the chapter called Lucidity, which is, I almost hate to say it because of the rest of the story, but it is, quite frankly, one of the best written chapters of any works of literature, works of fiction, for that matter, in general, that I have ever come across. It's pure genius. Let me put this statement into perspective. Imagine the ending of Evangelion. Imagine everything that does wrong. Remember the ending of Evangelion, in which, whatever story the show was having is completely put aside because it's not quite important, as the main character's own self-acceptance, apparently. Except that self-acceptance comes basically at the cost of him ever growing into a better person. Because the self-acceptance part leads to basically some sort of postmodern solipsist way of thinking that kills the story altogether, and worst of all, it's treated as its ending, when in fact it couldn't possibly be logically an ending because there was the rest of the story that was basically left apart to give Shinji its moment in the spotlight and basically reiterate the fact that all this story was completely all about him. I mean, angels, end of the world scenario, apocalypse needs to get up and save the world. That doesn't matter, because everything has to be about Shinji accepting himself as the twerp that he is. What is the problem with that? There's several problems, but the biggest one is that's not a conclusion to a story. That could be a conclusion if it wasn't a story about giant robots and alien monsters invading. That could have been a conclusion if this was just a story about a boy learning not to hate himself. If it was a story about just that, without all, the giant robot action and story that actually deserves some precedence, even though that story was already bad to begin with, but that's besides the point. The point I'm trying to make is that, in the case of Shinji, the story did not have any right to end right there. That moment of self-revelation, if you will, should have been the first step, which led to self-acceptance, should have been the first step for him to grow into a better main character, so that he can get it together and do what needs to be done to save the world. But that did not happen, now did it? You see, here's the problem when your main character is the epicenter of your narrative world, and everything that happens has to be somewhat connected to what he does, and as the basic importance of doing something for these characters to actually interact with. All of that is squandered if the main character refuses to grow, and the story is made pointless. Lucidity, this chapter in Project Horizons, does something all too similar to the ending of Evangelion in structure, but it provides a better context for it, and all the philosophical babbling is not entirely pointless. This chapter realizes that Blackjack, coming into self-acceptance, learning to cope with what she'd done, and learning not to completely hate herself, for both her sake and the sake of others, that was only the first step towards self-improvement. A self-improvement step that she eventually would have to take in order not only to become a better person, a better main character, but to help her get it together in order to save the world. I want you to think about this. Think about it, because it's mind-bending. a pony fanfiction somber, a pony fanfiction writer, took the ending of Evangelion and turned it into something that's actually functional to an overarching story in the best way it could possibly be done, too. A fanfiction author wrote a better Evangelion scenario than the writers of Evangelion. And that's why, for all the story's flaws, and it has, believe me, it has plenty of those, I decided to stick with it. I decided to stick with the story because I really like Blackjack. I really like whatever she might do to, you know, to get better, or maybe do some other more totally crazy suicidal stunts that would lead to explosions and action and crazy stuff, and almost dying several times to the point that death becomes kind of cheap, which is bad, which is always bad, mind you. Nonetheless, I stick with the story, even though it already jumped the shark tragically when the author decided to have her meet up with Little Peep, the main character of the first story. That was a really bad decision, and the trick he used to justify that happening in continuity felt cheap, to say the very least. That is the moment the story jumped the shark, way too early in the story. After chapter 33, which might have been a huge deal breaker for many people. You know, you do know what happened in chapter 33. I don't need to tell you, now do I? Now, yes, that's the moment in which the story jumped the shark, not the moment in which we finally revealed what Project Horizons is and everything that it entails, which is beyond idiotic, if you ask me, and not even the moment in which we are revealed what does Blackjack's cutie mark effectively mean. As bad as it was, no, the story really jumped the shark back then, but it was still... And after that, it kept jumping more giant radioactive sharks over and over again, until it became an entire ocean of mutated shark monsters. Metaphorically speaking. Although, knowing this story, I wouldn't put it past to have a literal ocean of mutated sharks popping up at the end of it. Like I said, subtlety, it's not its strongest strength. Especially if you have a story featuring mutated manticore mares and flaming mutated monsters and all kinds of ridiculous over-the-top stuff, including a character forcefully ripped from Full Metal Alchemist. You know of whom I'm talking about. And then, of course, there is the plot itself. Not that kind of plot! Stop it! You know what I'm talking about. Don't make me come there. The story. Oh, God. I knew all too well, because I had plenty of experience in criticizing business and all that. I knew all too well that this kind of confused and contrived and potentially convoluted tale that wanted to basically take all the holes in the original story and fill them with explanation upon explanation and revelation upon revelation, to the point that it completely kills the mystery, mind you, and to the point that it only creates more questions that will not be answered, and the more the author tries to answer them, the more they become convoluted and contrived and nonsensical. Well, I saw that coming. I could only foresee this kind of complex story all revolving around past and present conspiracies, with a few ponies at the center of it all, because they were at the center of it all, and all of that somehow managing to revolve entirely around Blackjack herself, even though it really makes your universe feel small and not as interesting in comparison. I knew that eventually, at some point, the author would have had to explain what all of this was actually all about. Would have to explain what was going on, what was it, and basically reveal the entirety of it, after dropping hints and more conspiracies and more, frankly, unnecessary moments in which certain characters might be responsible for the death of other characters. We didn't really need to know how they died to begin with. And then we would have some other characters that were depicted in a way in the original Fallout Equestria story, but then their image of them gets completely squandered for the needs of this story, which come off as not convincing in the slightest. I'm talking about Luna here, among many other things. I really don't like the way she was characterized in this story. If only because it conflicts with the way she was characterized in the original story, which is the exact opposite. I also really don't like how Golden Blood seems to be at the epicenter of it all at some way or the other. With this silly little Ministry of Inter-Ministry Affairs, or somewhat, at the moment I don't remember the name, because he was manipulating everyone so that he could do something or the other thing to basically ensure that something won't happen, and then the exact thing he didn't want to happen actually happened. And all of this somehow is linked to Blackjack herself. All of it. Because of course, Cognitum would know what Blackjack was doing all along. And she was manipulating her to get there to meet her in the core. And of course Golden Blood would know about her. And of course he wouldn't be dead, by the way, after 200 years, because apparently no one is being dead in this story after 200 some years, which is also another thing that bothers me. And of course the dealer character would know this or that, and of course everything she does seems to have a purpose or the other, and this story drowns itself in too much of coincidental destiny for my liking. What's coincidental destiny? Okay. Basically, when you have events and plot points of a story, all being connected to something or the other in the most forced way possible. In a way, it doesn't really leave much room for interpretation of an interesting world to take shape. When every story is revolving around, it was destiny and it was meant to happen all along because this character was meant to do this and all that because this character is Pony Jesus. Basically. Imagine the Amazing Spider-Man movie story and you might get an idea of what I'm talking about in Coincidental Destiny and how the world feels smaller because of that. Which is a crime because this story, which is approved by the original author of Fallout Equestria, is considered canon in the Fallout Equestria universe. So that's primarily the reason why I'm complaining so much about it. Basically, I'm on a roll here. The little Peep in the original story turns out to have a destiny of her own. But she doesn't discover about it up until the very end. And idealistically, the readers don't discover about it until the very end, along with her. And since Fallout Equestria actually knows how to do subtle writing and clever world building, all the things that Little Peep does, they don't feel like they are part of a greater scheme or greater destiny. They feel like things that are happening on her, whether by accident or not, in her journey towards self-discovery and basically in a journey to discover herself and what she can do for the wasteland. Her story feels like the traditional hero's journey, without the obvious Jesus biblical undertones that most hero's journey story tend to have as of late, when it comes to lazy writing, that is. The thing is, think about how her story began. It wasn't some explosive manner or over-the-top shenanigans. No, she decided to just leave her stable to go after a mare. That's it. That's what happens. Then things escalate after that. But even so, you don't get a clue of what she's meant to do, or if she's meant to do anything at all, up until the very end. Up until the point, it feels like she's just doing something. This thing, she's on a mission because she chose to be on this mission. Because she feels she has a responsibility. And she feels she has a responsibility because she discovers she has the ability to make a difference. It's called subtle storytelling. Not only that, but it leaves a lot of room to interpretation and to... What I'm getting at is that K-Cat wrote a fantastic open-ended world by which you could have a lot of side stories spawn from it. Imagine Star Wars. Imagine the original Star Wars trilogy, that is. Think about how large that world felt. Think about how interesting it was, with all its potential and characters and stories and lore. And then think of the prequel that tells you, hey, the Force is resulted by the midi-chlorians or whatnot, and now we're going to explain how everything works, so there is nothing left of interesting to discover of this universe. Project Horizons is the prequel trilogy. Except it's not a prequel. Except also it's not really all that bad either, but now I think you're starting to get the problem here. Project Horizons wants to explain everything. Not only about its own story that it wants to tell, but also about the previous story. Wants to eliminate all doubt that was left, all open endings, it wants to explain everything, and by doing so, it makes the universe smaller and less interesting. We did not need to know what happened to Rainbow Dash. We really didn't. We did not need to know the intricate political maneuvers of pre-apocalypse Equestria to know why things went bad. It was a failure of democracy, it was a failure of friendship. It was because the 6 ministry mayors, the main 6, isolated themselves instead of sticking together, and friendship didn't win in the end. Simple and straightforward as that. But no, thanks to Somber, now the importance of the ministry mayors was completely diminished in favor of this one golden blood fellow that basically ruined everything because he was utterly, awfully misguided. Oh, and he also was manipulated by an alien entity. And now we get to the part that I hate the most. There was an implication in the original story that the star metal came from space. Okay, that's fine. It served some purpose in the story, but we really did not need to know about alien civilizations after that. We really didn't. We mostly didn't need the inclusion of the Eater of Souls in the story. I mean, really, it's kind of impossible to take this seriously now, because at the end of the day, the story of Project Horizons basically includes an ultimate weapon of mass destruction, the moon, Skynet, and Lavos. Skynet and freaking Lavos. There is no way around it. It's Lavos. It fell on Earth eons ago. It shaped the land above him, apparently. Maybe. I don't quite remember. It was so silly. And it's like an entity of ultimate apocalyptic doom. It's Lavos. Play the music. But the future refused to change. This is silly, even by Fallout Equestria standards, and let's not get sidetracked, but the original story did have a few silly moments, but honestly, they are easy to not be bothered about it. But this is beyond ridiculous. This story has gotten so out of hand and so idiotically convoluted. It's hard to really care about it. But I still do. I still do care about it. If only because I care about Blackjack. Even after everything that happened to her, and even after the redundancy of some of her conflicts, she's still the best thing about it. She's still this one really amazingly well-written main character that you want to cheer for at all costs, and you really want to, get to her more than deserved comeuppance. Which will not, honestly, will not be a secret for anyone. I mean, again, coming back to the subtle writing in the first story, we only understood what Little Peep was meant to do at the very end. Not even halfway through this Project Horizon story, we already can kind of figure out that she's the descendant of Twilight Sparkle, and she's probably going to be the element of magic, and she's basically Pony Jesus. I mean, again, subtlety, Somber. You begin this story with... You begin the story... Already, at the beginning of the story, feels like you were trying way too hard. I mean, think about the sober way for the question begins. Then think about Project Horizons, and it involves raider invasion, rape, murder, and Pony Terminator. Deus. I'm talking about Deus. Oh, and speaking of Deus, well, wasn't that a fun twist that it just so happens to be the rapey father of Rampage, which is really Peppermint, now the daughter of Twist, which apparently they had a daughter all along, even though it was never mentioned or brought up ever before in any of the other flashbacks. Which, by the way, these mind orbs related flashbacks, aren't they starting to become really convenient? I have to really question the positioning of one certain memory orb in chapter 70 that reveals the backstory of Rampage or Peppermint, and I really have to question how and when was the memory orb positioned in that specific place, even though the memory doesn't end there, and when and how did Twist actually have the time to collect her memory, or someone to collect the memory from her. That doesn't really make any sense. Oh, I'm sure Somber is going to explain it later on. And as he's going to explain that, something else will pop out that doesn't make any sense. Reading this story, being a fan of this story, is really frustrating, isn't it? surprised the relationship between Blackjack and Glory lasted as long as it did. Honestly, you'd think they would have broken up ages ago. Oh, I was almost forgetting about this. I was almost forgetting about the one thing that irks me the most, absolutely the most about it. Blackjack's special talent. Blackjack's special talent is victory. Victory is her talent. Her cutie mark represents winning. How do I even explain this? Apart from the fact that winning is not a talent, is an outcome you might gain by the use of an actual talent, winning is an outcome, not a talent. Aside from that, do you know how stupid that sounds? Do you know how ridiculous and just dumb it sounds for someone to have a knack at winning, let alone a pony to have a cutie mark that represents her ability to win? First of all, when did Blackjack ever win? I mean, yes, she did win fights, and she did kill a lot of people and cause the death of many other people to win that, but did any of that ever feel like a victory? Like an actual victory? It didn't. Maybe she would win the big fights, you know, like the whole thing with the, you know, the Enclave and the Pegasus City above the clouds and all the epidemic and that guy that went crazy, and honestly I can't remember his name now, but you know what I'm talking about. She definitely win there, and then she got crushed by something, because that's what always happens. But that's not even the real problem. Do you know how much makes your main character's achievements look cheap if you're telling us that her ability is winning? It makes it sound as if your main character's accomplishment were not deserved. If anything she did because it was her destiny to win to begin with. So she didn't really have to put any effort in it, because she would have won anyway, because it's her destiny to be the victor. And you're turning her into a Mary Sue, that's what I'm saying. That's the last thing Blackjack needs to be. Really. It cheapens everything about this character in ways you wouldn't imagine. Now, if her talent were to be, being a gambler, so to speak, being good at gambling, which would in turn represent her own tenacity in doing things, that might have made us shred of sense. Maybe the reason why she keeps going isn't some higher goal, but just her own psychologically fallible tenacity and the addiction to all of this, which was a fundamental part of her character. Up at some point, the fact that she cannot help but being herself, she cannot help to go on, no matter what it costs, even though she might hate herself even more in the process. She has to keep going, even though she might have no idea what actually needs to be done in order to win. But no, her talent is she's a winner. Yay for good storytelling. I'm sorry, but that really riled me up badly. It just... No. No! Just no! I can't get over many of the silly things. I can't get over the fact that Golden Blood was somehow still alive. I can't get over the fact that Fluttershy somehow had a daughter. I can't get over the fact that I can't get over the fact that Luna was a villain apparently. I can't get over the fact I can even really force myself to get over the fact that the soul of the Eater of Soul exists, and Project Horizons is basically a super weapon on the moon. I can get over the fact that Deus is Rampage's father, even though it doesn't make any sense. I can get over all of this somehow. But I will never get over the idiocy of stating that your main character's main quality, main attribution and talent is winning. No. I'm sorry, but no. But it's not important at all, actually, at the end of it. Because, you know, Cognitum decides, hey, I'm gonna steal your talent. And she does so. And then Blackjack is transferred back into some sort of blank body. And she doesn't have her cutie mark anymore. But, guess what? It didn't change anything. She keeps winning, so to speak. Fights, at least. She keeps winning fights. So, what you're saying here, Somber, is that the cutie marks, or at least talents and destiny, aren't really important in the slightest. Even though you're building your entire story after the knowledge that Blackjack is Pony Jesus. And it's her destiny to do something great. Somber, you cannot do both things. In fact, it would have been so much better if you didn't really explain what a cutie mark meant and left it open to interpretation. At least you would have left one thing open to interpretation in your story where nothing is left to interpret, so to speak. Still, Lucidity was a great chapter. Lucidity, yes, the chapter in which Blackjack learned self-acceptance. It's just too bad that chapter was followed immediately by the one chapter in which Blackjack cheats on Glory with some random bad pony she met. And just like that, she gets over the fact that she's been raped. The consistency sometimes is just riveting. It kind of tells a lot about the story as a whole. But anyway, chapter 70 has been uploaded recently. You all know that by now, of course. And, well, according to Somber himself or some of his editors, we have like 4 or 5 chapters left to go, so we're really at the end of it. And I really cannot stop reading now, can I? I know it's going to be over-the-top, explosive, and silly. I fully expect that. I just hope that Blackjack's own comeuppance is going to be worth all of the frustration. So, no pressure there, Somber. No pressure. Well, I'm all out of booze, so it's been like, what, 44, almost 45 minutes? So I wager this is a good moment to stop my ranting, and, well, at this point I might as well comment on any of the remaining chapters as they will be uploaded. Just for completion's sake. So yes, this was my very quick, well, not so quick, but generalized overview of the story so far. And I hope you enjoyed the ramblings of a lunatic, such as moi. Well, that was it. See you next time, partners. I need more booze.